320 million tons of gold confirmed, worth 12 point something trillion dollars.
In the heart of Africa, a nation once known for its coffee and wildlife has just shaken the world. Uganda has struck gold. But this isn't just gold, this is a discovery that could rewrite the story of global wealth. Geologists now claim deep under the red soil, Uganda just struck $12 trillion in gold. A new Africa is rising. In what could be one of the biggest gold discoveries in history, Uganda has found gold deposits worth over $12 trillion. That's more than the GDP of Germany, Japan, and India combined. For decades, Africa's wealth has been stolen. Raw gold shipped out, profits never returned. But Uganda says this time will be different. President Yoweri Museveni declared that no raw gold will leave the country. It must be refined and processed inside Uganda, creating jobs, industries, and real national wealth. This isn't just a discovery, it's a game changer. From Guinea to Ghana, Niger to Namibia, Africa is reclaiming its resources. Now, with $12 trillion in the ground, Uganda stands at a crossroads. Will it follow Africa's new path of sovereignty and strength, or fall into old traps? The world is watching.
Brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of Africa, today we gather at a time when the earth itself has chosen to speak for us. Uganda, a nation whose name was once whispered in global markets as just another exporter of coffee, just another recipient of aid, has sent a thunderous message across the world. Beneath our soil, hidden under the rolling hills and the red earth, lies a fortune so vast it has shaken the global financial system. 12.3 trillion worth of gold reserves. This is not merely a discovery of minerals, this is a discovery of destiny. For decades, Africa has been treated as a supplier of cheap labor and raw materials for others to refine, process, and profit from. The wealth of our soil was never meant for our people, at least. That is what the world believed. But now, with this single revelation, Uganda has become the epicenter of a new era. The very foundations of global economic power have been shaken because this discovery is not just large, it is monumental. It is enough to change the balance of trade, enough to rewrite the rules of global finance, enough to threaten the supremacy of the US dollar. For over a century, gold has been the bedrock of global wealth. It underpins currencies, strengthens reserves, and gives nations leverage. And for just as long, Africa's gold has been stolen, smuggled, and shipped overseas to enrich others. We watched as our mines made billionaires in London, Paris, and New York, while our people remained barefoot in villages without roads or electricity. But this time it is different. This time, Uganda has declared that this gold is not leaving our soil without rewriting the terms of engagement. And Washington is terrified. The U.S. economy is heavily reliant on global financial dominance. Its dollar reigns supreme because the world has little choice but to use it. But what happens when Uganda, sitting on gold worth more than half of America's GDP, decides to trade in gold-backed currency? What happens when Africa collectively decides that we will price our oil, our cocoa, our cobalt, and our gold not in dollars but in currencies of our choosing? Overnight, the demand for U.S. dollars collapses. Overnight, the ability of Washington to print money and export inflation to the rest of the world collapses. This is why the discovery in Uganda is not just geology, it is geopolitics. It is the beginning of the end of economic colonialism. Do you think it is a coincidence that almost immediately after the announcement, Western media rushed to cast doubt on the numbers? They said the estimates were exaggerated. They said Uganda lacked the technology to exploit such reserves. They said it would take decades to mine. Why? Because they are afraid. They are afraid that Africans might wake up to the reality that we are sitting on the wealth of the world, and we no longer need permission to use it. The U.S. fears one thing above all: a resource-rich Africa that refuses to play by Washington's rules. They fear an Africa that no longer exports gold cheaply but instead refines it, mints it, and uses it to create its own wealth systems. They fear an Africa that creates its own banks, its own rating agencies, its own financial networks free from Western control, because the moment that happens, the trillion-dollar machine of exploitation grinds to a halt. But Uganda's discovery is more than economics. It is spiritual. It is psychological. For too long, Africans were told that we are poor, that we must depend on aid, that our future lies in migration, remittances, and foreign loans. This gold tells a different story. It tells us that we are sitting on abundance. It tells us that poverty was never our destiny, it was a system designed to keep us blind to our inheritance. And now that inheritance is in plain sight, the question is, what will we do with it? Will we allow foreign corporations to swoop in, offer us pennies on the dollar, and strip the gold from our soil as they have always done? Or will we say, as Uganda is beginning to say, that this time we are in charge? Will we build our own refineries, our own mints, our own sovereign wealth funds that will invest in African infrastructure, African education, African innovation? This discovery could finance bullet trains across the continent, highways connecting Dakar to Nairobi, factories turning African raw materials into finished goods, universities that rival Harvard and Oxford, hospitals where no child dies for lack of medicine. This gold is not just a resource, it is an opportunity to free ourselves forever from the cycle of dependency. But to seize this opportunity, we must be ready for resistance. Make no mistake, my friends, the pressure on Uganda will be immense. Sanctions will come, threats will come, loans will be offered with strings attached, foreign advisors will arrive with friendly suggestions to privatize, to liberalize, to sell. Some of our own leaders will be tempted, just as they have been tempted before. But if we are to truly rise, we must hold the line. We must remember that this is not just Uganda's gold, it is Africa's gold. And Africa cannot afford to lose this moment. We must also be wise. This gold must not become a curse, as oil became a curse for many nations. It must not enrich a few while leaving the many in misery. Uganda has the chance to create a model for resource management that benefits every citizen. Imagine every Ugandan child receiving education funded by this gold. Imagine every farmer having access to irrigation because of this gold. Imagine power plants, research centers, clean water projects all paid for by what was once hidden underground. And yet, the world will watch closely, waiting for failure. They will point to corruption, to mismanagement, to conflict, hoping to prove that Africa cannot handle its own wealth. We must disappoint them. We must show them that the African century is not a dream but a reality, that we can manage trillions with transparency, with vision, with unity. This is why we must unite as Africans. Uganda's victory must be Africa's victory. When one of us rises, all of us must rise. Let us create an African gold reserve that backs not just one currency but a continental currency. Let us use this gold to negotiate fairer trade terms, to demand respect at global forums, to finance African solutions to African problems. And let us remember, this is only the beginning. If Uganda has $12.3 trillion in gold, what lies beneath the soil of Congo, Tanzania, Zambia, Mali, and Ghana that we have yet to discover? Africa is the richest continent on Earth, and for too long that richness has been a curse because others came to take it. But today we can choose to make it a blessing. So I call upon every African leader, every business person, every farmer, every student, stand with Uganda. Defend this discovery, celebrate it, demand that it be used wisely, because when we rise together, no superpower can stop us. The United States may be worried, in fact, they should be worried, because the time when Africa was a pawn in someone else's chess game is over. The time when Africa's resources fueled someone else's empire is over. This gold is not just Uganda's future, it is Africa's ticket to freedom, and we will not trade that ticket for anything less than true independence. When the news of Uganda's $12.3 trillion gold discovery broke, it was not Kampala alone that trembled with excitement. It was Washington that trembled with fear, behind the closed doors of think tanks, in emergency meetings at the U.S. Treasury, in late-night phone calls between Wall Street bankers and politicians. A single question kept echoing: what happens if Africa refuses to obey? For decades, the United States has operated on a principle of control, not through chains, not through visible armies marching across African soil, but through the invisible power of the dollar. Every African loan, every development project, every imported good from fertilizers to smartphones, all tied to the U.S. financial system. But Uganda's gold shakes the very foundation of that system. Because gold is power that cannot be printed. Gold is value that cannot be sanctioned. Gold is wealth that does not need U.S. permission. Do you know what terrifies them the most? It is not the gold itself, but the possibility of Uganda refusing to sell it in U.S. dollars. Imagine for a moment if Uganda decides to sell its gold directly to China in yuan, or to Russia in rubles, or to fellow African nations in an African currency yet to be born. The monopoly of the dollar collapses. The spell is broken. The very engine that sustains the U.S. economy, the forced global demand for its currency, grinds to a halt. And already we see the signs of panic. Western media outlets immediately launched campaigns of doubt. They said, Uganda is exaggerating. They said, the numbers are unreliable. They said, Uganda lacks the technology to extract it. Yet behind the curtain, their mining corporations have already sent delegations. Their bankers have already started drafting proposals. Their politicians are already whispering about security concerns in East Africa. They dismiss the discovery with their mouths, but they chase it with their hands. In Washington, advisors warned of a new African resource nationalism. They warned that if Uganda succeeds in controlling its gold, other African nations will follow. Look at Niger with uranium. Look at Ghana with cocoa. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo with cobalt. The dominoes are ready to fall, and Uganda may be the spark. This is why the United States is already preparing its familiar playbook. They will use debt as a weapon. They will deploy the IMF and the World Bank, offering Uganda assistance loans tied to conditions that ensure foreign corporations get access to the mines. They will whisper promises of infrastructure, of partnerships, of military support, all in exchange for a slice of the gold. They will try to create division, to buy off leaders, to pit one African nation against another. But Uganda must resist, and Africa must resist. We must not allow another century of theft disguised as aid, another century of plunder hidden behind investment deals. This gold must never become another story like Congo's diamonds, where local communities remained poor while foreign billionaires grew fat. This gold must never become another story like Nigeria's oil, where trillions vanished while children drank dirty water. Brothers and sisters, let us remember the words of Thomas Sankara, who said, "He who feeds you controls you, and I say to you now, he who controls your gold controls your destiny." That is why Washington is desperate. That is why they fear this moment. But there is hope and there is power. Across Africa, leaders are watching. In Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Ghana, Rwanda, Tanzania, leaders are realizing that Uganda's discovery is not just Uganda's chance, it is Africa's chance. And for the first time in decades, a spirit of unity is rising. We see the foundations of a new Africa, an Africa where nations trade with each other in resources, not in borrowed currencies. An Africa where we do not beg the world for technology but build it ourselves with the wealth beneath our feet. Imagine what is possible if Africa decides to pool its gold reserves, its oil reserves, its rare earth minerals, and back a continental currency. Imagine a currency stronger than the dollar, stronger than the euro, because it is backed by the physical wealth of the richest continent on earth. Overnight, the tables turn. Overnight, Africa becomes the lender, and the West becomes the borrower. But we must tread carefully. Washington will not allow this easily. They will use their most dangerous tool, destabilization. When resources are discovered in Africa, suddenly wars break out. Suddenly terrorist groups appear. Suddenly regions once peaceful descend into chaos. These are not coincidences. These are tactics. Uganda must be vigilant, and Africa must stand ready to defend it. Because make no mistake, this gold discovery is not just an economic story, it is a political revolution. It is a challenge to centuries of domination. And the US knows it. They know that if Uganda succeeds, the myth of Western superiority crumbles. They know that if Africa stands together, their grip on global trade ends. That is why they are already furious. That is why they are already plotting. But here is the truth they do not want to hear. Africa is no longer asleep. The youth of Africa are awake. The leaders of Africa are rising. The people of Africa are demanding dignity. And with $12.3 trillion in gold under our soil, we have the resources to turn demand into destiny. So let this discovery be a turning point. Let Uganda's gold become Africa's shield against exploitation. Let it finance African schools, African highways, African satellites, African armies to defend African soil. Let it end forever the era where Africa was the richest continent under the poorest people. And to the United States, hear this clearly. Your panic is justified because the age of control is ending. You cannot sanction the sun. You cannot sanction the rivers. You cannot sanction the gold buried in our soil. And you cannot sanction a people who have chosen to rise. This is more than Uganda's story. This is Africa's story. And in this story, for the first time in centuries, Africa writes the ending. Not Washington, not Wall Street, not the IMF. Africa writes it, and it begins with gold, but it ends with freedom. What began as a gold discovery deep beneath Uganda's soil has now become a global wake-up call. This is no longer just about gold, it is about destiny. It is about who gets to decide Africa's future. For centuries, Africa's treasures built empires in London, Paris, and Washington while our children walked barefoot and our farmers begged for aid. Those days are over. Uganda's $12.3 trillion gold discovery is not simply a jackpot, it is a declaration of war against poverty, dependency, and the arrogance of the West. It is a loud, thundering statement that Africa is no longer content to be the world's supplier of raw materials while others mint the wealth. We are refining, we are trading, we are building, and this time we are keeping what is ours. The panic in Washington is proof that we are on the right path. When they send their analysts to predict instability, what they mean is that they fear losing control. When they warn about economic risks, what they mean is that they can no longer dictate the terms. They are not afraid of chaos, they are afraid of African confidence. And now, the question is not whether Africa can stand up, we already have. The question is whether we have the courage to stay standing when the pressure comes. Because make no mistake, the pressure will come. Sanctions, smear campaigns, threats. They will try everything to turn this victory into a curse. But Africa has been cursed. Before, and we survived. This time we are not surviving, we are thriving. Imagine the power if Uganda uses its gold reserves to back a pan-African currency. Imagine a future where African nations trade with each other using gold as collateral, without begging for IMF loans, without signing one-sided trade deals, without handing over our dignity. That future is within reach, but only if we hold our ground. Tonight, I say to the youth of Africa, this is your moment. Do not sell your inheritance for quick cash. Do not let foreign corporations whisper sweet promises while plotting to strip your land bare. Build the refineries, train the engineers, guard the mines. This gold is not just Uganda's, it is Africa's. And to Washington, London, and Brussels, hear this clearly. The era of cheap African wealth is over. The era of calling the shots from across the ocean is over. From Kampala to Accra, from Lagos to Kinshasa, a new Africa is rising, proud, sovereign, unstoppable. So let us close with this truth. 12.3 trillion in gold is not just an economic number, it is a spiritual number. It represents the wealth that was stolen, the futures that were denied, the dreams that were delayed. And now those dreams are no longer delayed, they are here. This is the turning point. This is the moment we choose power over pity, pride over fear, unity over exploitation. And when history books are written years from now, they will say, this was the day Africa stopped asking for permission and started writing its own destiny. Africa is not waiting anymore. Africa is not begging anymore. Africa is ready, and the world will never be the same.